Hi everyone, today I'm going to be showing you a few meals that we've been enjoying in the fall. I'm going to be using a lot of vegetables that we picked from our fall garden, and if you missed our harvest video, you can check that out. It was the last one that we uploaded. And I'll just show you what we've been having for breakfast, lunch, and dinner lately. For breakfast, I'm going to be making some overnight apple cinnamon steel cut oats. For 90% of the year, we usually have eggs in the morning for breakfast, but since our chickens are currently molting and their egg production has really decreased, we've been switching to oatmeal, and it's been really nice to have a little bit of a change of pace. And I love to make this overnight because it really makes the hands-on cooking time really minimal. So I'm starting off with a pot where I have a couple tablespoons of either coconut oil or butter. Today I'm using coconut oil, and then I'm going to put in 1 apple that I've diced. This is a great fall oatmeal to make if you have done the quintessential fall activity of apple picking and you have an abundance of fresh apples. But I always seem to have just like one really sad, lonely apple in the fruit drawer, and this is usually what I use it for because it doesn't matter if the apple doesn't look really great because it's going to soften up and be wonderful in the oatmeal. I also added a pinch of salt, and then I'm going to let the apples fry off for a little bit, and then of course, since this is an apple cinnamon oatmeal, I'm going to add a nice healthy dash of ground cinnamon. After this has a few minutes to cook, you can even let the apples get really nice and brown and they'll start to caramelize. Then I'm going to add my oats, and I'm going to be using steel cut oats because this is my favorite cut of oats. I think it just ends up with such a nice texture. It's still really nice and chewy and doesn't completely turn to mush like other kinds of oats do. And I'm going to be adding 1 cup of steel cut oats. And for each cup of steel cut oats, you'll need 4 cups of liquid, and I'm just going to be using plain water. But first I like to let the oats fry a little bit in that residual oil and the apple juices for a little bit. Normally this would take 20 to 25 minutes on the stove for it to fully cook and hydrate, but this overnight method is going to really reduce the amount of time that you have to actually be at the stove and babysit this pot. So after I add my 4 cups of water, all I'm going to do is keep this on the heat and let it come up to like a simmer or a boil, and then once it gets to that point, I can cover the pot and turn off the heat, and this will just sit on the stove all night with the heat off, and then by morning the oats will have absorbed all of the water and they're going to be ready to eat. I'm also going to add a couple of tablespoons of brown sugar, which is going to pair really nicely with those apples and the cinnamon, and all I need is a couple of tablespoons. I like my oatmeal very lightly sweetened, and we're also going to be adding some dried and fresh fruit later on, which will add a little bit more sweetness. So here's what it looks like after it's been heating up for a little bit. It's just barely at a simmer, but I was a little impatient to go to bed, so I just put a lid on it and came back to it in the morning, and this is what it looked like. You can see how the oats have absorbed most of that water. Usually it's even a little bit thicker, but since I didn't let it come up to a full boil, it was still slightly liquidy, but still very different from how we left it the night before. At this point, the oats are done cooking, so all I like to do in the morning is warm it up a little bit, and I'll add some dried fruit and some nuts and seeds as well. And today I'm doing raisins and sunflower seeds while it's warming up, and as it warms up, it's going to get even thicker, and the end result that you get from these oats is going to be incredibly creamy, but still a little bit of like a toothy chew with those whole grains of oats. And another amazing thing about steel cut oats is you don't even have to add any milk or dairy in order to get this like incredible creaminess, which makes it really nice because if you don't have milk in the house, it's totally okay, and also it saves you money because obviously water is cheaper. This is just such a nice, warming, comforting breakfast that has been so nice on these colder mornings. Then we're just going to top off our bowl of oatmeal with some fresh fruit, usually a sliced banana, and also some more seeds or nuts. I'm adding more sunflower seeds here for a little bit of a crunch, and that is the finished overnight steel cut oats. For lunch, we're going to be having some taco-inspired stuffed sweet potatoes. I'm starting with 2 sweet potatoes that have already been cooked. Usually throughout the week, if I have the oven on for something like to roast vegetables or to bake some bread, I'll stick a few sweet potatoes in some foil and I'll just throw them in the oven with whatever I'm cooking. That way I always have cooked sweet potatoes on hand ready to go for this meal or for anything else. And when I have those sweet potatoes prepped, it makes this meal very quick and easy to pull together. So you can see those sweet potatoes are already really nice and soft, so I just cut each of them in half and I'm going to be stuffing them with some taco-inspired toppings. First, I'm going to salt and pepper the insides of the sweet potatoes just to season them. Then I'm going to take a fork and kind of like fluff up the insides of the sweet potatoes a little bit just to make these like little ragged edges. This is going to make it so that the toppings don't roll around as easily, since these cut surfaces are really nice and smooth, especially because I'm going to be putting some beans in here that are round. I don't want them to just like roll right out of the sweet potatoes. So once I just create some nice edges for the beans to grab onto, I can add some black beans. You can use canned black beans, or I usually bulk cook a whole batch of dried black beans and then I'll just have them stashed away in my freezer. So again, this makes it a really quick and easy ingredient to throw into meals, so I don't have to cook them the day of. Next, I'm going to add in some diced peppers. These are banana peppers and they are some of the very last ones that we picked out of the garden right before our first frost. So when it's not pepper season, a lot of times I'll omit this, but since I have them, they'll be great with these sweet potatoes. I'm going to season once again with salt and pepper so that those topping ingredients get seasoned as well. And then I'm going to top these with cheese. I'm using pepper jack cheese. And then this is just gonna have to bake in the oven at 350 degrees for about 10-15 minutes. Basically, you just need to warm everything up because the beans and the sweet potatoes are already cooked. You just want them to warm through and for that cheese to get melted and nice and bubbly and golden brown on top. Here's what the stuffed sweet potatoes look like fresh out of the oven. And because everything is kind of cooked and prepped beforehand, it just takes 5 minutes to pull all of the ingredients together, and then you can stick it in the oven and it'll take a few minutes to bake, but it's hands-off time, so this is always a really quick and easy lunch or dinner to pull together. We're going to have a nice fresh salad on the side since the garden is producing such lovely lettuce and greens at this time of year. We've also got some fresh radishes, one little cucumber, which is another little vestige of the summer garden. And then lastly, I have some thinly sliced red onion. I'm gonna put some of this on the salad and also some of it on top of our sweet potatoes. And one more topping for the sweet potatoes, I'm gonna do some diced up pickled jalapenos. But there are a ton of different things you can add on top of this. Sometimes we like to do salsa, some fresh diced tomatoes if you have it. You could do some sour cream, and you can do radishes, avocado, basically anything that you would put in a taco, you can put on the sweet potato and it will be so delicious. I'll also put some fresh cilantro on top of the sweet potato and top the salad off with some sunflower seeds for some crunch. I always like to add some kind of nuts and seeds wherever I can because it's a really good source of healthy fats and also omega-3s. I had a simple homemade salad dressing in the fridge that has lemon juice, apple cider vinegar, extra virgin olive oil, 1 grated garlic clove, Dijon mustard, honey, and salt and pepper. It sounds like a lot, but it's a super simple dressing that is easy to whip up and store in the fridge for the entire week. So that is the finished meal. It is a really nice, filling, healthy meal, but was really quick and easy to put together, and pretty much all the vegetables came from our garden too, which is a really nice bonus. This meal is pretty much always on rotation for us. We have it once every couple of weeks, and even when we don't have fresh greens for the salad on the side, we'll have some other kind of vegetable, and then the main part of the meal, the sweet potato and the beans, those are pantry staples. Sweet potatoes store really well, so we always have some of those in our pantry. It's also a really affordable meal. It's vegetarian and it can be made vegan easily if you just leave out the cheese. So overall, I think it can be a really good staple meal for pretty much anyone. And for our third meal, we're going to be making a soup because fall means soup season has officially started. We're going to be making a lentil and vegetable soup. And sure, lentil and vegetable soup does not sound that exciting, but we've been eating this soup every week for the past 3 weeks. like multiple times a week, and it has just been so good, so nourishing, really warms you up on a cold day. And I've noticed that after eating this soup consistently for a few weeks, I have just felt really good. I just feel like I've been really energized. My body just feels like really balanced and like I'm taking good care of myself, which is really nice. So I'm not saying this is like a miracle soup or something, but I'm not saying that either. So I'm starting off by chopping up a bunch of vegetables. I have a few onions that I'm going to dice up, and I'll also be dicing up a few carrots. Those are probably two things that I would always keep in the soup, but other than that, a lot of it changes based on what we have, either coming from the garden or hanging out in our fridge. If I had it, I would probably also throw in a few stalks of celery, but I don't have that at the moment, so I'm gonna leave it out and it's going to be perfectly fine. These are the carrots that we picked in a recent harvest video, and you can see that big jumbo carrot that we picked, and it's going to be perfect for this soup. I'm also going to chop up a few cloves of garlic. I'm using about 5 here. And then we can move on to the cooking, and I'm going to be doing the cooking in my Instant Pot instead of on the stove. I've really been liking this method because you can saute in the Instant Pot first, throw all of your ingredients in, and then just close it up and it will just do everything for you, and it will cook the lentils really quickly to a very soft consistency. So first I'm starting by putting my Instant Pot in the saute mode, and I'm going to add my onions, carrots, and I would add the celery too if I had it, with a couple of tablespoons of olive oil. And I'm just going to saute those with some salt and pepper. If you don't have an Instant Pot or a pressure cooker, you can definitely just do this the old-fashioned way on the stove. But because we are going to be pressure cooking this, it's going to be a lot quicker to get a really soft, creamy consistency, whereas on the stove it would probably take you half an hour to an hour depending on how long you let it sit for. And one reason I've really been enjoying this method recently is because the days are getting shorter and the sun is setting a lot earlier, so we really like to go for walks in the evenings before the sun sets. I like to get this soup going and then I can just set it to cook in the Instant Pot and leave it unattended. We can go out and have a nice little walk, and when we come back, we'll have a nice warm soup ready and waiting for us, and we don't have to worry about leaving the stove on or anything like that. So anyway, I've added a bunch of spices to the pot. I added ground coriander, ground cumin, paprika, 1 arbol chili, and 2 bay leaves. And I also added in that chopped garlic. I put approximate measurements on the screen, but obviously I never measure, so you can just adjust based on your preferences and how big of a batch of soup you're making. So I just let the spices bloom for about a minute, and now it's time to add the lentils. I'm using some French green lentils today, which are probably just about the most beautiful lentils I've ever seen. They're kind of speckly and a little bit smaller than brown lentils, but you can also just use common brown lentils if you want. They both work great. And now we're just gonna keep adding stuff to this soup. So first off, I have a can of homegrown diced tomatoes. This is my last pint of diced tomatoes from last year before I start breaking into this year's cans. And I'm using a pint, but a quart would also work great here. Then I'm going to put in a quart of broth. Any kind of broth would work, vegetable, chicken, or beef. All the other ingredients are pretty neutral, so whatever broth you want to use will be great here. Even if you just use vegetable broth, because of those spices that we added, it will still have a lot of depth and flavor to it. And next I will just go through my freezer and pantry for whatever vegetables I have and feel like adding. This is a great way to use up a lot of vegetables that I've preserved either by freezing or by dehydrating. Today I'm adding a quart of frozen kukutsu gourd, and since I only used a pint of diced tomatoes, I'm also going to add some dehydrated cherry tomatoes. But there are really so many options, so you can just go based off of what you've preserved that year or have in your garden. Zucchini would be great in this, either frozen or dehydrated. Also green beans, maybe some okra. And the very last thing I like to add is some kind of leafy green, preferably one that is like really hardy, like collards or kale, because this will really hold up to the pressure cooking. What I'm using today is actually greens off of my broccoli plants that I harvested in our last video. These are a little bit tougher, but they will cook so beautifully in the pressure cooker and become really velvety and soft. I'm just tearing the greens into pieces with my hands. You can also slice it or chop it, but they're going to shrink as they cook and become really soft, so it doesn't matter if they're kind of in larger pieces. As you can see, this is a truly like dump everything into one pot kind of soup, and somehow it always ends up amazing even though I have switched this up many times with different ingredients. So hopefully with this like basic blueprint and some ideas of the things I put in the soup, you can adapt it to your own taste. Here's what everything looks like before cooking. It doesn't look like there's a lot of liquid, but once those greens cook down, they're going to be submerged in the broth. So I'm just going to put the lid on the pressure cooker and put that little knob on and make sure it's sealing. And then I'm going to pressure cook this for 10 minutes. That's going to be more than enough time to cook the lentils. I like to definitely go over so that the lentils get really soft and start to break apart, because it gives the soup a really creamy, thick texture, almost like a stew. If you use brown lentils, I think that they break apart even more than this. The French lentils tend to keep their shape a little bit more, and I really like when lentils break apart. So both lentils are great options. I like to finish the soups off with some lemon juice and some freshly chopped parsley. I also forgot to do it this time, but a little drizzle of extra virgin olive oil at the end really helps to finish the soup off, especially if you have used vegetable broth instead of chicken or beef broth, because it could just use a little bit of extra like richness, and that olive oil is a great way to finish off the soup. Here is our beautiful finished bowl of lentil soup, and I think I've talked enough about how much I like this soup, but here's a little secret. I think the real reason that we love this soup so much and have been eating it multiple times a week is so that we can eat bread. So whenever I make this soup, I will make sure to have some fresh bread, either some sourdough or some no-knead bread, a really nice crusty bread that is going to go so well with this soup. And I definitely broke the #1 rule of baking bread here, and I sliced my bread just a little bit too early. It wasn't completely cooled, but we were just starving and really wanted to dig in. But it was delicious nonetheless. Let's be real, I would happily have bread at every meal, but I mean, basically every single thing in this soup is something that is good for you. You've got like 5 different kinds of vegetables, you have leafy greens, you have lentils that are rich in fiber and protein. So if that gives you a reason to have a few slices of bread on the side, I think that's totally fine. And because I added so many things to the soup, it makes a really big batch. Probably like 8 servings, which is enough for about 4 meals for the 2 of us. So after I make it for dinner for the first day, we'll usually just have it for lunch for the next 2 or 3 days following. And it's really nice to just not have to worry about what to have for lunch or what to cook. I can just throw a little pot of this on the stove and let it heat up and toast up some of that bread, and we are good to go. So those are our 3 fall meals and what we've been eating recently from the garden. Let me know of any fall meals that you've been enjoying eating lately. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.